Hi everyone. Okay, so I think we will start off with our webinar. Thank you to everyone who's joining us on Zoom, as well as everyone who's joining us on Facebook. I see we have quite a lot of people joining us on Facebook tonight, so that's wonderful. For those of you who don't know, my name is Mariska Morris. I am the Rolling Inspiration Editor and also the Communications Officer for the QuadPara Association of South Africa, who now publishes the magazine. In our latest issue, we published an article by George Louw, who's with us tonight, on the COVID-19 vaccine myths. He debunked 10 myths, including things like, does the COVID-19 vaccine actually have the COVID-19 virus in, which it does not, as well as whether or not COVID-19 vaccine can cause autism. George Louw has worked in the medical field his entire career and has quite extensive knowledge in the medical expert field, but he's also done quite a lot of research to prepare for this topic, which we will be discussing tonight. We won't be discussing all 10 of the myths, so if you are interested in getting all of that information, you can go to the website, subscribe, get the magazine and read the article, or even just subscribe and then get the magazine or the access to the article on the website. But then also we will be discussing a couple of the myths tonight, as well as a couple of new myths, which George will tell us about in a second, or which we'll get to in a second. For those of you joining on Zoom, please stick around. We do have a lucky draw that we'll be having afterwards. I'll explain that towards the end. But yeah, thank you so much, George, for joining us tonight. We're excited to have you.
Thank you for having me. Can I just check, can you hear me clearly? Is this signal strong enough?
I can hear you clearly. If someone else on Facebook or in the chat can't hear George, please just let us know. But I can hear you just fine.
Okay, good.
Wonderful.
Yes.
So like I mentioned, you debunked 10 COVID-19 myths in your article for the first issue of Rolling Inspiration for 2021. And then from my side, I was just curious as to why was this article so important for you to write?
Yes, you know, Mariska, COVID-19 is for many of us probably the scariest thing that we've ever encountered in our lifetimes. It's especially so because it's all around us, but we can't see it. And fear has a tendency to generate rumors in people's minds. And these rumors tend to become facts, but false facts. And there's so much false news floating around on social media, because social media is the ideal platform to spread rumors. And often the more far-fetched the rumor is, and the more fear and confusion it generates, the faster it spreads. So we need to debunk all these myths that are popping up all over the show about COVID-19 and the immunizations. Because effective immunization of a population is really the best way to combat pandemics, by establishing the so-called group or herd immunity. If we look at examples of in the past, and I'm going to be addressing those a bit later. If we look at polio, if we look at smallpox and measles, all these illnesses killed thousands and even millions of people until the vaccines came about, and polio is eradicated, smallpox is almost eradicated, and measles, although not eradicated, has been reduced in most instances to a relatively mild illness, although it still kills a significant number of people throughout the world, mainly because people have got this fear of immunizations and they don't get themselves immunized, and they tend to get themselves killed, or they may be killed because of that. So false news can derail immunizations. And the purpose of this article is to identify the most common trends in false news about COVID-19 immunizations, and then to provide the true facts as provided by experts.
And I think that's so important what you were saying as well. You know, we do have this risk of getting exposed to fake news, or even information that's misrepresented. because of some rumors that went running around, or someone who misunderstood an article who reposts that. So we do need to be very, very careful of where we get our sources and our information about this, which is why we're so happy to have you here tonight, George, to just clarify some of those things. So that also brings us to the next question, which is exactly that. Where did you get your information, and why is this significant?
Okay, and at the outset, I must state categorically that I'm not an expert on COVID, and I'm not an expert on immunizations. I'm not a microbiologist. I'm just a retired GP. So what I did is I researched the internet for reputable organizations, because although Heinrich is going to be talking about the dangers of the internet, if you use the internet wisely, and if you know what you're looking for, and if you know the reputability of the organizations that you're searching for, the internet is a vast source of knowledge and information. Anyhow, be that as it may, I searched the internet for reputable organizations that commented on the myths about COVID-19 investigation. My search specifically went on the myths. These myths were largely generated, as we mentioned, on social media. So I selected 3 reputable sources. And the interesting thing was I found that their listing of the most widespread myths corresponded with one another. And that was important, because they, in the corroboration of the important myths, I knew that their lists were true, and were the right lists. The organizations that I selected were the Johns Hopkins Hospital's Medicine Department, the University of Missouri, and then a South African company, One Life Insurance. And I selected that company because they created a list of myths that they compiled from their own research of about 10 different sources. So as I said, the significance of the research lies in that 3 totally independent, reputable sources came up with essentially the same list of myths. So what I did is I ranked the myths in my article accordingly. Those myths covered by all 3 the sources came in first, followed by the myths that were only covered by 2 of the 3 sources. And that's really how I found my information. But I think that it's very trustworthy.
I think you also touch on 2 very important facts. I think firstly, that you do go to a source that you know is reputable and can be trusted. So for example, you were saying, health experts, big corporations who've done their research, who know what they're doing. They're in the interest of making sure that the information is factual, rather than just looking at a WhatsApp message that was circled by friends and family. But like you also mentioned, we'll be discussing this in a bit more detail with Heinrich in a minute. But yes, we do need to make sure that we make sure we get the right sources. So in your article, you have debunked 10 myths. And of course, our readers can go read more about that in the actual magazine. So if you're not a subscriber, please do go check out the magazine. You can go to our website and get the magazine there. So just for interest's sake, I'm going to list some of the myths that you debunked, including the research was rushed, COVID-19 vaccine gives you COVID, the vaccine changes your DNA, the vaccine contains tracking devices, when you've received the vaccine, you don't need to wear a mask, if you had COVID, you don't need to get the vaccine, the side effects of the vaccine is dangerous, the vaccine can cause other illnesses such as autism, the vaccine has caused infertility among women, and the vaccine doesn't protect you against the new strain of virus. And of course, you've shown all of those are incorrect, and you've given quite extensive explanations as to why. But I do think there's a couple of them that is very important that we need to discuss tonight. So maybe we can start off with just you explaining to us, was the research rushed?
Okay, so let's start with a question. If you were standing alone in the veld somewhere in the middle of let's say the Serengeti, and you noticed a pride of about 10 lions around about 50 meters away, slowly walking towards you and licking their lips, would you sit down and do an analysis of your options to survive, or would you speedily climb the nearest tree? So, and I think the answer is fairly obvious there. So yes, the research had to be done speedily because this was a dangerous killer. And because of this, we need to be very selective of the vaccines that we buy. The big industry names are more likely to develop effective vaccines because they've got the resources, and also they have to protect their names in the industry. If they produce a vaccine that is the whole AstraZeneca situation is a prime example, and we'll be discussing that a bit later. So in the interest of protecting their name and their brand, and also in the interest of earning an income, they have to research speedily, but they have to come up with a product that works. They cannot afford to do half-cocked rush jobs, so they must go through all the research processes and the development processes, and they must research it properly and speedily. But in effect, all their trial results will be short-term because the virus has only been with us for a year, and the vaccines have only been around for a couple of months. So there is no long-term or medium-term information about these vaccines. And this is why records have to be kept of all vaccinated persons so that you can immediately kick off with long-term studies on the effectiveness of the vaccines over 3 years and 5 years and 10 years and 20 years. You have to start with it immediately. But we must be very wary of vaccines from sources that do not have standing in the market and that aren't backed by reputable academic institutions, because there appears to be a developing counterfeit market that aims to make money out of swindling people with so-called vaccines that are in fact not a vaccine. Just a story here. I met with a friend of mine who's a doctor who went to Mill Park Hospital today for his vaccination. They called him up and they said it was his chance, so he had to report to Mill Park, and they vaccinated about 1,200 people today at Mill Park Hospital. But in the waiting areas, there were a couple of nurses walking around with vials of vaccine in their hands and trying to flog it to the people waiting there. And the danger there, even though they swiped the vaccines and they were real vaccines, they broke the cold chain. And if you break the cold chain, the vaccines become useless. And so they are really, I suppose the best word is evil people that are trying to make a quick buck out of other people's misfortune. So if somebody comes to QASA and says, your members don't have to stand in the queue anymore, we can let you have vaccines immediately and at a good price, you need to very carefully check where these vaccines really come from.
Yeah, I think that's what you were pointing to is so important. I mean, first of all, there was an element of rushing the vaccine, but of course, the big corporations will take their name in consideration. They will make sure that they produce a product that's safe and that has been tested to the best of their ability in the short time frame that they've had. But of course, we shouldn't fall for any scams that might be out there right now of people trying to make a quick buck out of giving us actually a false vaccine. So it's best to go through the proper channels, to go through the official channels and get the best possible vaccines that's out there. So that brings me to my second question, which is, does the vaccine give you COVID-19?
And the answer there is, the short answer is categorically no. And the longer answer is, let's explain it. The vaccine doesn't contain the virus. For people that have been reading up about it, certain vaccines like the smallpox vaccine contains a virus, but it's called an attenuated virus. So the people that create the vaccine take the virus and then they draw out the component of the virus that causes the illness, but they leave the rest of the virus intact. So then when the virus is then placed in the body, it can't give the illness, but it tells the body recognizes it as a foreign object and it creates immunity against it. So if the real smallpox virus comes along, the body has got immunity. But in the case of COVID, what they do is they take a protein that mimics a component of the virus that stimulates the immune system of the body to kick into action. So it's just a component. It's not the real the entire virus, and but that component causes the body to create immunity, and then when the body gets into contact with the real virus, immunity is there, and you can get yourself protected against the virus. So there isn't any chance of getting infected with COVID-19 when you take the immunization. But having said that, this protein that you get injected with is foreign to the body, and it may result in some side effects in that after a vaccination, it's quite normal to see a bit of skin redness, a bit of swelling and pain around the injection area, and you might even have a slight fever and headache and fatigue, but that's over after about 3 days, and it's not COVID. It's just a reaction to the foreign body of the foreign object that was injected into your body.
Yes, so people don't have to be worried they won't get COVID from the vaccine, but you might feel a bit down, but that's nothing to be afraid of. That's just your body's natural reaction to building up its immune system and working through that. So thank you for that, George. And so I think the next big question, and I'm going to kind of condense these two questions into one so you can answer them accordingly, but a lot of people now also wonder that, if I've gotten the vaccine, do I still need to wear a mask? Or even if I've had COVID, do I need to get vaccinated?
Okay, yeah, so that's the two sides of the same coin. In terms of having to wear a mask, you must remember the vaccination protects you from catching the disease, but you can still carry and transmit the virus, even if you don't get sick. So the virus is in you and it multiplies in you, but it doesn't make you sick. And until your body's immune system knocks off the virus, it's still alive and kicking. So yes, you must wear your mask, and you must maintain social distancing, and you must wash your hands, and you must sanitize, because you could still spread the virus to other people, even though it doesn't make you sick. So that's really the reason why you have to wear a mask. And now in terms of if you've already had COVID, do you need to get vaccinated? The experts simply don't know the answer to that question yet, because we don't know how long natural immunity from having had COVID will last. There are people who had COVID and tested positive and who became reinfected 3 or 4 months later and had COVID again. And then there are other people that seem to remain immune following the recovery from COVID. So everything is still very new. And the long-term studies just simply aren't there to categorically state yes or no. Because the virus hasn't been around with us for long enough for the long-term studies, as I mentioned earlier. So what do we know? We know that the immunizations are safe. We know that they cannot give you COVID. We know that they do not altogether prevent COVID, but it helps you prevents you from becoming seriously ill. And we also know that, and this is the important one, we also know that once enough people have been vaccinated, of the 60 million people in South Africa, 40 million are vaccinated, then herd immunity will control the virus sufficiently for the government to cancel all these anti-COVID measures. And we can go back to life as we remember it. We can shake hands with one another, we can hug one another, we can return to our sports stadiums, we can go and watch soccer and rugby and cricket and all the other things. We can attend concerts, we can go to festivals, and best of all, we can fill our churches again for services, for praise and worship, and for bidding our loved ones farewell at funerals. So yes, have your vaccinations, even if you have the virus.
Now, I look forward to the days in which we can go around without masks and sanitizing. But as you so very well put it, George, it's so essential that we do still keep those measures in place, because it's not only about protecting ourselves, but protecting everyone around us. Because a mask, like we know, doesn't really protect you from maybe getting the virus, but it does protect other people from getting the virus from you if you are ill and you don't know. Because as we also know, there's a lot of people who get COVID and don't show symptoms. So we need to be very careful of that. And thank you for clarifying those. It's good to know we're not going to get sick if we get the vaccine, and it's good to know if enough people get vaccinated, we can go about our business without having to wear those pesky masks. Then I think we should discuss the role of the vaccine, because there's some misconceptions. The vaccine is not 100% guaranteed to completely prevent COVID. So we kind of discussed this slightly. As you mentioned as well, it's just going to prevent some of the side effects. So you might not get as sick with COVID, or even you might, in some cases, not get sick at all with COVID, but you can still have the virus.
That's right, yes.
So I don't know if you want to add to this or just clarify.
Let's chat about vaccines in general, because historically many of these myths that came about from COVID were spillovers from myths about the measles vaccine and about lots of other vaccines. So I think it's just important to chat a little bit in general about vaccines and how they work, and then look at some historic cases where vaccines are really changed the world. The first time we're exposed to a germ, whether it's a bacterium or a virus, it takes time for the immune system to respond and we become unwell. But once the immune system has a memory of the infection, it can respond very quickly to destroy the germ when next time we're exposed. Now, vaccines, as I've explained previously, have portions of the germ, the virus, and it stimulates immunity to form, so that once you get infected, the vaccine will prevent you from getting really sick. Immunizations work very well throughout history to prevent a wide range of serious diseases, and I'm just going to look at three instances. Let's look at smallpox. Smallpox was a terrible illness. On average, 3 out of every 10 people who got smallpox killed. And those who survived had scars that looked like a really massively bad acne, and even worse than that, all over the body. Because smallpox is similar to chickenpox, but it's just much larger and much more aggressive. And these scarrings were sometimes very severe. History about smallpox goes back as far as the 6th century, when it was introduced to China from Japan. But thanks to vaccination, the last natural outbreak of smallpox was in the United States, was in 1949, and the last case in the world was in Bangladesh in 1975. And since then, smallpox has been gone, and it's all because of vaccinations, of immunizations. If we look at polio, in the early part of the 20th century, polio was probably the scariest thing that people could think of, because every couple of years you'd get epidemics rushing through towns and cities and countries and making people sick. And many people didn't even get sick. It was very similar to COVID. Many people who got it didn't really get sick. But the people that got sick could die from it, or could become very, very disabled from it. You've all seen people walking with calipers because of polio. But because of widespread vaccination, polio was eliminated from the Western Hemisphere in 1994. It's still seen a little bit in Afghanistan and Pakistan, but they're working very hard to eradicate it there. And then measles. Measles, is a household name. Everybody knows about measles. It's highly contagious, and it's a serious disease caused by viruses. And before the introduction of the measles vaccine in 1963, measles killed about 2.6 million people per year across the world. And just another scary example is before 1848, measles was not known in Hawaii. And then some sailors came across from California, and they introduced measles. And within 2 years, between 10 and 33% of the entire population of Hawaii was killed by measles. And even as early as late as 2018, 140,000 people still died of measles, mainly those that didn't get vaccinated by it, and mostly children under the age of 5, despite the availability of a safe and effective vaccine. So all of this tells you that vaccinations have really allowed us as human beings to carry on with life as normal, because it takes the epidemics away. And we are working towards having the COVID vaccine take away COVID. So, you know, if I can move on to the next topic, although it's not 100% guaranteed, and it doesn't completely prevent COVID, it's still necessary to receive the vaccine, because you know, if we look at what happened with COVID, it can mutate to new variants. It can create the immunization to become less effective or lose its effect altogether. And even if it isn't 100% effective, it reduces the chance of serious infections. So even the AstraZeneca immunization, if it was given to South Africa, it would still work to a reasonable extent, even on the mutation. It might not be that effective, as effective as some of the other vaccines on the mutation, but it would still have an effect. And then, as I've mentioned earlier, immunization doesn't just protect us as persons, it also, it has a double role. It also protects the population at large by creating herd immunity. So even those that refuse immunizations will eventually be protected by those of us that are wise enough to be immunized ourselves.
Yeah, that herd immunity is really important and something that we need to work towards as soon as possible. So my next question is really something that I think will be a bit more challenging to explain, but we have so many different companies coming forward with different vaccines. Why is that? Why are there so many different vaccines? Is there a big difference between them? What can you tell us about that?
Okay, and the short answer there is survival. Because the more people working on solutions, on immunizations, the better the chances of developing effective agents, or more than one effective agent, because different techniques result in different products. So if one is found not to be suitable for a particular country, like the AstraZeneca one, then the Johnson & Johnson one can move in and do the trick. And as we go along, more and more vaccines will come in the pipeline, and research on the vaccinations will tell us which is the most suited for a particular country, and then we'll use that as well. And then again, the lion example. If 10 lions are storming 3 people and all 3 people have got guns, will they tell just one person to shoot, or all 3 of them shoot?
Definitely all 3 will shoot. That's a great explanation, and then we should be very grateful that there are so many different vaccines out there, or companies working on vaccines, which is great. So I think really the next one is something that you also mentioned to me before we did the webinar that you would like to discuss. So could you tell us a bit about the AstraZeneca debacle? Should we be worried about blood clots? What happened there?
Okay, that's really 2 questions. In terms of the so-called debacle, I'm not going to say too much about it, just that it was not really a debacle. It was just an unforeseen event, because AstraZeneca developed this 2-shot vaccine against COVID-19 as they knew it to be at the time. At the time that they developed it, there weren't any mutations. So they developed it against the virus that they knew. But when they launched their proven and their tested vaccine, COVID fired back with a resistant variant. AstraZeneca did nothing wrong. It's similar to the flu vaccines. The flu vaccine for this year works this year, but next year there's a new flu variant and a new vaccine is necessary. And it's exactly the same as with COVID. But now, as regards to the blood clots, I've decided to give you a formal quote from MedPages, which is also a very reputable organization on the internet. They said recently vaccinations with AstraZeneca COVID-19 shot were put on hold in countries across Europe following reports of rare blood clots, low platelets, and hemorrhage. After formal review, the European Medical Association and the World Health Organization both issued statements saying that the overall risk for clotting with this vaccine is no higher than for the general population, and that the benefits outweigh the risks, and that the vaccines could continue. The American Society of Hematology has also said that the benefits of the AstraZeneca vaccine outweigh a clotting risk. And I think that's enough said.
Thank you, George. That really that makes us feel a bit better, and I think that's so true. What you were pointing to, we often want to point our fingers and blame these big corporations creating the vaccines if there's anything missing or at fault. But really, the fact is they know very little about the virus, and we've seen the virus mutating quite a lot. So they will kind of always be one step behind the virus and just try and keep up with what's happening. So thank you for clarifying that for us. And as you so rightly also said, let's focus on the benefits, which greatly outweigh the negatives. So yeah, let's discuss the Johnson & Johnson's vaccine next, which is going to be used in South Africa. You mentioned that, I know there was a series of trials, and now the main vaccine's used locally. What do we need to know about both the vaccine and the trials?
Okay, now the Johnson & Johnson vaccine story was again false news, because now a lot of people came along and said, this isn't a proper vaccine yet because they're doing trials, they're using us as guinea pigs. That's why they're giving it to us at a good price so that we can get vaccinated, and then they can do trials on the efficacy of the vaccine. So we're really a bunch of guinea pigs here in South Africa, which is really a load of nonsense. It's a storm in a teacup, because the J&J vaccine has been authorized formally for human use. They went through all the trials and all the tests and everything that was necessary for it to be registered. This so-called trial that everybody is jumping up and down about is just an observational study about how effective the vaccine is going to be in the medium to the long term. Because what we've got at the moment is a couple of months. The vaccines has been around in the world for about 3 or 4 months max. That's not exactly medium term or long term. So, but once you get vaccinated, you get registered for observation. And then your 3-year study and your 5-year study and your 10-year study and longer studies can commence. And that's really all it is. I really don't think people should get excited about this. It's most certainly not that we're guinea pigs for Johnson & Johnson. There's nothing sinister here.
Yeah, and I think that's so true what you were saying. I mean, it's also completely unethical for them to inject someone with a virus that hasn't been approved for human use. And then, of course, as you said, there's also the reputational situation that they want to keep intact. They want to make sure their reputation is not damaged by this vaccine that they're handing out. And then, of course, as you said as well, we don't have any, because COVID-19 is so new, we don't have any research. So the trials that they're doing now, or the registration that's happening, it's not about, rejecting you with the vaccine for the first time ever, so we'll see what happens. It's for the 5-year, 10-year, 20-year research that they need to conduct to see what if there is any impact that the vaccine has on the body, or just how the body reacts with the vaccine. So exactly. We are going to open up the floor if there's anyone on the Zoom chat or on Facebook who has a question for George and would like him to just answer something about the vaccine. You can post now. We are checking, so please do leave us a comment, a question, anything like that. I'll just make sure that I keep my eye on the comments in Facebook. And then, George, I don't know if there's anything that you would like to add, or that you would just like to mention to the readers about the COVID-19 vaccine. Maybe you want to speak about the president's address last night. I don't know if you listened in on that.
No, the president's, we can park the president's address. It's just this organization called COVAX. There's a lot on it, about it on the internet. But really, what COVAX is it's an international, multinational organization that got together to make sure that there isn't sort of preferential treatment with vaccination. That we've already seen. America, they've already had 100 million vaccinations, and they're aiming for 200 million before President Biden's term is 100 days old. So it would appear that the rich nations are hogging the scene in terms of vaccinations. But COVAX is out there to make sure that this doesn't happen, to make sure that there's a fair and equitable distribution of the vaccinations, and that the poorer countries get their fair deal as well. It would seem that the poorer countries will just have to wait a little bit longer because, like South Africa, but certainly the vaccinations will arrive at the poorer countries as well, because the world realizes that unless everybody in the world is vaccinated, a pandemic is going to remain a pandemic. So it's in the interest of everybody, including the richest of the rich countries, that the poorest of the poor are also vaccinated. And that's what COVAX is all about.
Thank you so much, George. I think that's so well put, and such an important point to mention as well. I mean, with the rest of the world, as soon as the cross or the country's borders open up, they will be just as at risk of getting the pandemic back in their own countries if the rest of the world's not vaccinated as well. So it's really in everyone's interest to make sure that everyone gets vaccinated across the globe. Thank you so much. I see we don't have any questions, so thank you for joining us. I don't know if you want to stick on for Heinrich's chat. But thank you so much. It was really great to have you on board, and it was awesome to have you just answer some of my questions that I had about the COVID-19 vaccine. So
I think has been kind enough to listening to my chat, so I'm going to.
Thank you so much, George. And then, of course, if anyone wants to read more about George's article or get to know, find out more information about the 10 myths that he debunked, you can simply just subscribe to the Rolling Inspiration magazine. You can go onto our website, click on the subscribe tab, fill out the form, and we'll get in touch with you. If anyone else is there, please hang around. As I mentioned, we'll have a survey that I'll be posting at the end, which you can complete and stand a chance to win a year subscription to Rolling Inspiration. So that we're very excited about that as well for you.